being open to that kind of surprise, no matter where it comes from, no matter which kind of connection or innovation it happens to be, being able to still consider society and the world as a work in progress. You haven't got it all figured yet. You still have to be open.
Hello and welcome to this roundtable session on the Open.org channel. Today we are here to have a conversation about the book Open, written by Johan Norberg. I will let the participants introduce themselves, but will also say that we are happy to have the author with us here today. My name is Jimmy Sjölund and I'm one of the Open Organization ambassadors, together with some other people in this conversation.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Berenshausen. I work with the Open Organization community as well. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about this fascinating book with you all. I am Senior Open Source Program Manager at GitLab and work with the Open Organization community.
My name is Ron McFarlane, and I'm an Open Organization ambassador, and most of my function really is taking a look at periodicals and books that are on the market and see if they connect with Open Organization's principles. So the articles that I write generally have some kind of principle in mind. And this one really is on inclusivity, how I bring societies or organizations together to work together. And that's what I was really concentrating on the open organization in a society concept.
Hello, I'm Brooke Manville. I'm an independent consultant. I have had a lifelong interest in democracy and democratic style organizations. I contribute articles periodically to opensource.com, and I'm now working on a book about the future of democracy and how democracies survive.
Thank you all for the invitation to participate. My name is Johan Norberg. I'm a historian of ideas and a writer and a lecturer from Sweden, and most recently of this book, Open, the Story of Human Progress. And I've followed what you've written about it, the kind of thoughts that you have, and with lots of interest, and I'm delighted to have this roundtable about it with you.
Thanks so much for that. And I'll get us started by just offering a little background for our viewers on where we've been. The articles Mr. Norberg has been just referenced are published on opensource.com. Starting a few months ago, those of us in this group who are on the call today sat down with this really interesting book, Open, the Story of Human Progress by Johan Norberg. I started chatting about, the author's take on the centrality of openness today. And it led to some really great discussions among all of us, and it led to a really great series of publications from Ron and from Brooke on opensource.com. And you can see those today if you go to opensource.com/open-organization. We'll also put the links in the show notes for you. But as we, dug in and really enjoyed our conversation, we thought it would be a lovely idea to invite the author to join us. And, thankfully, Johan Norberg has joined us today. So to make the most of our time, I want to just get us started with, we'll say an easy question, maybe a softball question. What is open? What does open mean? And how do we define it for the sake of this book and for the sake of social and political system?
Well, I could go into various aspects of openness, open exchange, openness to people and new possible connections, like meeting you for the first time, even though we're on 3 different continents in this discussion, and openness to new ideas from various places. But if I were to summarize it all, what it is that I'm looking for when I say that openness is an important trait and, in fact, an engine of world history in so many ways, then I would say that openness is the ability, the interest, and the institutions that make surprises possible. Rather than having everything thought out and planned for in advance, as an individual, as an organization, a business, or as a society, you're open to surprises from strange new places, people from other countries or neighbors who come up with new insights and new innovations, but also within societies, so that everything is not planned top down from a blueprint, but instead it's a network where every part of the network is allowed to test new ideas, to experiment, and then openness is the being open to that kind of surprise, no matter where it comes from, no matter which kind of connection or innovation it happens to be, being able to still consider society and the world as a work in progress. You haven't got it all figured yet. You still have to be open. That's my summary.
Thanks for that. I don't know if any other panelists want to respond or have thoughts on that definition.
Yeah, one of the thoughts that I had after reading the book is how do we, let's say, put some kind of program in place or activities or I should say procedure in place so we can help people become more open to people who are different than us. And if you can remember in my article, I started out by thinking about first we have to recognize that there are people who are different than us. And then we've got to respect those differences. Then we've got to try to understand those differences. And then once we understand that, then we've got to tolerate and we've got to somehow put up with those differences. And so I was trying to break it down into little tiny pieces of activities we can go through so we can become more open and we can start helping each other in various ways. What does the group think about that?
Yeah. No, that's an essential question. And mind you, I don't have all the answers. One of the reasons why I wrote the book is that I haven't got it all figured out. I want to start a conversation about these issues, and I'm happy to listen to all your input about this and all the other issues at hand. I just say this, that this is the key question, because my theory is that we are double-natured. It is our ability to be open, to cooperate, and to learn from one another that has allowed us to inherit the earth. That's why Homo sapiens came this far. We don't have to reinvent the wheel because we can be open to the people who have already invented it, and then we can combine our different ideas, our creativity. At the same time, this ability to cooperate was developed during a fairly nasty evolutionary era in human history. So once we climbed to the top of the food chain, because we could cooperate better than the predators, it meant that there was only one dangerous animal left out there, and that's other tribes, other groups of people who cooperated even better, and in a more dangerous past, that could mean the end of us, which means that our fear of others is also something that's fairly deep in human nature, both our open-mindedness and our closed-mindedness. And I think this is why it's always recurring, this call from the tribe in a way, and to belong there. And to me, I think that my reading of both history and of psychology is that we can deal with that. It's pre-wired, but it's not hardwired, this kind of fear of other groups. We can learn about where it comes from, and then we can deal with it. We can, just like, there is this evolutionary urge to constantly eat fat and sugar, but we can learn about diet, we can learn about exercise, we can learn about what it does to us if we only fall for that kind of temptation. And one of those things is learning about the value of openness, the value of others, and even groups of people and others who are the most different from us, who seem most strange to us, might be the very ones who have seen other things than we have and might inform what we are doing in a much better way and help us to then develop the institutions that help us to benefit from this.
I thought, Johan, that one of the most interesting parts of your book is this notion you just referenced, the dual nature of humanity. That seems to me to get to the conundrum of openness in so many different ways. So my thought as a sort of a challenge. I think this builds on what Ron was asking, maybe at a more strategic level. I loved your definition that open is basically allowing yourself to be surprised from wherever the idea, wherever the influence might come, and not to follow a hierarchical, pre-cooked pattern all the time. But there are limits to that tolerance for surprise. I mean, I don't think any Ukrainian would say, I was delighted to be surprised by what the Russians were going to do with my country once they rolled over the border with their tanks. There's this notion of tribal affinity, which you reference, but I think there's also, to use another, overused but important word, community. How do you know what the limits of open should be in order to nourish the innovation of those who have accepted a certain amount of openness? In other words, I think openness has to be moderated in some way by other considerations. That to me is, I think, a real strategic challenge. In the United States right now, and actually in many other countries, as you know, one of the hottest political topics is immigration. And you can see this question playing out. Some people saying we need more immigrants because that's how our business is going to flourish. That's how we're going to have a better economic base. We're going to fill jobs that we're having trouble filling. And then there are other people who are saying, no, that's exactly the problem. We don't want to have the whole world, coming in rafts to our country. There has to be some limit. And, those people are often accused as just being racist or nativist, but I think that's too simple. I think, again, communities have the right to define themselves in terms of certain common values, shared values, and just the comfort of living together with people who will not create violence when you ask something the wrong way. And so I think that how do we be as open as possible but not too open, to me, is the strategic question that flows from your duality of human nature point.
Yeah, finding the right balance, that's art. Well, obviously, sometimes somebody is out to get you, which is what Ukraine has found out recently, and one of the reasons why my country, Sweden, is now applying for NATO membership. And then, obviously, that ancient instinct of fight or flight and fight back is fit for purpose. It's, in fact, important in those circumstances, even though I would say that the ideas about open and closed and how you then deal with how you defend yourself is still very interesting and very relevant, and this might go too far for this discussion, but I mean, one of the reasons why Ukraine has been able to fight back so successfully is a more decentralized military organization with non-commissioned officers who have power to make decisions on the battlefield, improvise according to changing terrain, whereas the Russian military is completely top-down and waiting for the general to, or even Putin to come up with new orders. One of the reasons why they have to go to the front, the generals, and are being killed all the time. And one reason why the West is so successful is this cooperation between different open liberal democracies. But yes, it tells you something about the limits to openness as well. And I think the whole debate about immigration is about that. And I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that, yes, people do have principles and values in common that they don't want to compromise with. They don't want to be too surprised and suddenly find out that has all disappeared overnight. So how then do we make possible, we avoid zero-sum games between those different groups? And I think this is one of the things that scares people about immigration. We always end up in discussions about crime or the public sector. Are they a drain on resources so that we are going to have to pay for that? Then you establish those different zero-sum games and you reinforce your tribal identity. You have to belong to a group and fight back against them. How do we make sure that it's instead a positive-sum game? And I think that's very much related to our institutions, how we deal with immigration, the kind of incentives that immigrants find when they approach our societies. Because I must re-emphasize that I think in the long run, our societies benefit and are being constantly rejuvenated and re-energized by the inflow of people from other places with new perspective, with adding both their creativity and their work to our pie.
Yes, yeah. You know, the Ukrainian situation is so interesting in so many ways. I think that one of the reasons that they are succeeding is that Zelensky has been just a master of orchestrating open access to sympathetic countries to build a cause that's become a global cause in the name of freedom, which is kind of ironic because, you know, Ukrainian wasn't exactly the world's best democracy before all this happened. But now he's become like, you know, the George Washington of global freedom. And he's been able to, you know, orchestrate lots of sympathy to secure arms, but also to secure kind of, blame for the Russians on a global basis. And he's been a master. But, you know, he has been cleverly selective about where he goes to build his open community.
Sure.
He has not tried to enlist the Chinese. Well, maybe he has. He's very creative, but he probably would be not successful to do that. So again, it's this measurement between how far can we be open and preserve the safe space of innovation, if I may, without having the destructive forces.
I absolutely agree. I have to add that we see then the exact opposite in the Kremlin right now. I think this is such a perfect example of the dangers of not being open to diverse perspectives on the world. Putin being isolated there and just listening to his own yes men giving him the information that he likes, and then get stuck in his own propaganda bubble. It's such. He didn't understand Ukraine. He didn't understand his own military. Didn't understand how the West would respond because he doesn't watch television from other places and doesn't listen to the dissidents. He puts them in prison instead. And it's not just bad from a moral perspective. It's self-destructive. He's ruining Russia as well and his own position. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not only not on a society level, but also on a corporate level. As I mentioned when I introduced myself a little while ago, I work for a very, very I've only worked for Japanese companies most of my career. One was a huge company, was all over the world, and another was a very small single owner company. And the single owner was he had that top-down way about him. And I went off to Europe and I went off to America and I started opening up distributors. And I had all these distributors that I established business with. But the company was so small, they couldn't deliver the goods. So I would go to the boss, the owner of the company, and I would tell him, listen, we got problems. I promised these people a lot of things. And the boss, here again, our owner, he would go and he would yell and scream and just do horrible things, talking to the production people because they can't keep the orders up. Now, at that time, I'm feeling really good because he's coming to the rescue. But that after that, then when I started talking to the manufacturing people, I realized that they wouldn't talk to me anymore. So I could not go to the boss anymore. And the boss, because of his domineering personality, I had to do everything behind the scenes or else I would lose my voice too with those people. Because here again, just like the Russian soldiers, they think the boss can tell you what to do. So you can forget about responsibility because the boss told you what to do. So I I understand that top-down order-taking environment, but I know that it won't work because communication through the whole line starts to break down. So what I did is I created I called it my underground organization chart. And that's how I had to live. And that's the way I did it. But it's that same type of environment, of a top-down type of environment, as it was a ground floor discussion type of environment. I'm sorry, Brooke, you were going to say something.
Well, I mean, I yielded the floor to you, and I'm glad I did because you made a very interesting point. Let me actually build on what you just said. The thing, because, I worked in business for many years as well, and I saw just what you saw, and I behaved in some of the same, sort of, I'll just say, charitably devious ways in order to accomplish good things. It still strikes me one of the great anomalies of the world of business is even though everybody on this call worships at the altar of open in different ways, nonetheless, there are still businesses that continue in some level successfully with a very top-down, closed kind of culture. And you might say, well, there's an opportunity cost. If the boss wasn't such an idiot, they'd be 7 times as big and so on. But the reality is that many of these closed organizations, are still very profitable. They deliver, good products that people buy, and they endure for 30 years until that boss retires, and then maybe somebody with a different perspective comes in. But they don't all vanish in the same way that, just again to Russia. Putin has held on for a very long time, even though he has probably thought just like we're criticizing him for years. And so there's something about a timeline in the grand scheme of evolution that non-open experiments, or not even experiments, non-open approaches do manage to hold on. And and the world has to kind of put up with them, and the world even sometimes supports them because, they add some value in their own more limited way.
I think just to follow up directly on this precise point about authoritarians, and then we can talk about businesses and business leaders as well. I think, and when I listen to people who've followed Putin closely, and Xi Jinping as well in China, this has become much more a part of their identity in just the past few years. In Putin's case, probably the pandemic and his isolation during the pandemic has meant something as well, because he doesn't talk to people unless it's someone he knows who has been quarantined for 2 weeks. And not everybody does that. And that means that you're getting more stuck in your filter bubble. And when it comes to China, one of the reasons why China has been remarkably successful despite a very authoritarian system for 30 years is that they learned the lesson from Mao, that they couldn't have one guy at the top. They needed to at least have an open discussion within the Politburo, within the party, and more of a collective leadership so that different ideas, different interests came to the table. And it also meant that if they had to revert course, change direction, it wasn't one person held individually responsible who lost face. So they could constantly improvise, at least more than traditional dictatorships. Now that has changed in the past few years under Xi Jinping, and I think we're beginning to see the results now with this disastrous COVID policy, the economy, tying himself to the mast of Putin as well. So it might not be successful in the long run. At least there's some sort of tipping point where it doesn't work.
Yes.
More.
Yes.
But it's difficult to know where that is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think China is a living diorama of the tension that you talked about in your book, which is their economy, just to oversimplify, their economy took off 20 years ago because they started to be a little bit more open. In fact, I would say for a while they really embraced openness, in a fairly full-throated way. Of course, they couldn't do it completely from the get-go, but they started that. The rocket ship started taking off, and then Xi Jinping said, this is great. We can be both the richest and the most loyal to me at the same time. And then he started turning the screws. And, with each turn of the screw, the GDP numbers are getting a little bit more phony. The COVID response is getting a little bit less effective. And the innovation is declining. And, he's facing a reckoning, whether or not he can hold on long enough, to whatever his personal goals are, whether it's to build, more secret villas or have more ships or more mistresses. I'm not sure what it is, but he's got the tiger by the tail now, and he can't let go, but he also can't wrestle it to the ground, because he can't have it both ways. It's exactly what you say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the question is, Ron mentioned this, having this underground organizational chart, basically, and being able to circumvent and improvise. Is it possible to do that in a country? Yes, unless the guy at the top has complete control. And for a long time, at least in China, you could have that underground form of organization that made the economy function and the culture function. But the more totalitarian the country, and dare I say, organization, the less able are you to circumvent, because the guy at the top is trying to stamp out all this ability to improvise and change according to changing terrain.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a feeling when we talk about China, don't go too high. These smaller, let's say less known state-owned enterprises, SOEs, sometimes if you can approach them in a very, very detailed way, they won't consider the whole company or country. They will just consider their particular situation. And possibly, because I worked with a plant in China, and they were basically my source that I sold in Europe and America. That was the first part. But another part of it, there was an empty building there, and it just sat there. Our company owners, Japanese company, we owned the company. And we didn't have anything to do with it. It just sat there, and said, why don't I try to rent that out? And if I can rent it out to a foreign company and not just give them the space, provide employees to that little company, provide them import and export, provide them everything that they do except for their manufacturing. We will even direct their exports. So I did that, and I found an American company, did it for 8 years, but it was all quiet. It was all underground, so to speak. And China didn't even know they existed, because it fell within our organization chart, our established registered company organization chart. As far as China was concerned, it was just a subsidiary of my company. As soon as you get outside of Japan, that is a completely different company, completely different ownership, and completely different product, completely different market. But you see, we kind of went underground and such, and there was one lady in that office. All she did was deal with the Communist Party. That's all she did. We could not use her for anything else. We called her the personnel director, but even personnel issues she did. But she was that front person. So it's kind of all underground, but there's a way to get things done. And the Chinese, I like working with them. I really do. And I've had some pretty good success with them. So, but here again, if you have someone very domineering at the top, then everyone gets quiet.
I think one of the interesting variables that we're sort of talking about here, and I think I mentioned this in my in one of my reviews, is the issue of scale. I talked about what I called the unit of analysis. How big an entity do you want to can you make open? And this question of scale cuts both ways. Democracy is very hard to scale. It's very hard to have a huge participatory, community that's vast in numbers of people who are all contributing to how we should set direction and how we should make decisions. But it's also very hard for a tyrant or a authoritarian to rule over bigger and bigger organizations because, Russia is vast, China is vast, and then, at levels down below, people are going to figure out how to get what they want to get as long as they dodge the secret police and the monitoring, which extends the realm of a dictator, but still can't be everywhere. And so this question of scale, I think, is very important. It's another version of what we were saying before, which is how much can you actually control versus how much do you have to let go in order to preserve an open community. And I think the challenge of figuring out how to get more and more people to think about scale or to be part of a large experiment without lapsing into the tribalism or surrendering to the authoritarian, because that's the only way to kind of get something done.
Yeah, this reminds me of when I was giving sales training to salesmen who sell trucks to users. And that's where all the fun, that was all the excitement, because the guy who is using the truck is contributing something to his society. And if I can get the salesman excited about that, they're making deliveries, they're getting things done, they're getting food where it's supposed to be. And that was the job of the salesman, to make sure that was efficient. So it was not just selling trucks, it was improving transportation. Now you go one level up to that, you have the sales manager. The sales manager, he's the guy that controls all those salesmen that are doing those kind. So he's kind of like the motivation guy to do that. As soon as you go one step up, and Brooke, this is what the problem is. Then when you get into the finance people, he's further and further away from the customer. He's further and further away from getting the good feeling that the product you're delivering. Then it gets into here. Am I going to do it in new truck sales? Is it going to be parts business? Is it going to be service? And it gets into a financial environment, getting back to the issue of it gets so big that you can't see or feel the customer or the user or the society or the community, whatever. You can't feel it because you're way up in the clouds somewhere. And as further I went up, the more lonely I felt when I was giving those seminars.
Yeah, I think this goes for all kinds of human interaction and organization. There is a limit to how do you make sure that information reaches all corner of this place? How do you make sure that there's some sort of common values and goals? I think this is the reason why social media is the best thing and the worst thing on the planet, because everybody is trying to talk at the same time, even though you have nothing in common. Even if you might hate what the others are talking about, it all breaks apart. But if you specialize and you have this segment here of people who are into truck logistics in Ukraine, those who are here into Swedish goth music and so on, then you work for a common cause, but from your own individual perspective, and you build new knowledge and ideas and a greater community. But if it gets too big, you'd be shouted down by those who hate that band or are not interested in truck logistics. And that's why I think that all those organizational forms are works in progress. We don't know what's the optimal size. It right. Must get bigger, but at some point it's too big.
Right. You know, if you guys don't know the book by Stan McChrystal called Team of Teams, have you ever read that book?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's very.
It's the military guy, right?
He's the military guy who ran the special operations in Iraq and Afghanistan in the middle 2000s. He's a very thoughtful man, but he wrote this book about he created this, you know, for the U.S. Army, a very radical network of information sharing, because he figured out the only way we're going to beat Al-Qaeda is if we essentially match their network with our own network to be that much smarter than their network. And so he tells the story, it's elaborately laid out, about how he slowly built bridges between all these different sort of siloed units, all of whom knew something, one piece of the puzzle about what Al-Qaeda was doing. And, he said, somehow we got to break down the barrier so that we can be constantly sharing, constantly learning, and being 2 steps ahead of the terrorists. And in his book called Team of Teams, his first book is actually about what he really did, which is sort of close to the ground and also interesting to read. But then he kind of distilled it and said, the model is that we had, which I think is a model for the future for organizations, is to build a team of teams. It's essentially it's what you were saying, Johan, that there have to be small units that feel some comfort with one another and can be innovative and support new ideas. But those have to be networked to other small organizations, and you have to create some kind of a meta consciousness amongst all of them that they are also part of this bigger team. And that's again the scale question. How do you get the innovation, power, and frontline energy, like you were talking, Ron, that comes with relatively small scale to a larger scale without losing that kind of feeling and motivation and positive orientation towards learning from others. And his idea is you have to somehow build the team consciousness at a larger scale that was shadowed by the smaller scale version of what happens at the front line. But it's very interesting that if you're reaching for that question of how do you get to scale, I highly recommend that book. It's a very interesting sort of model to lay over this conversation.
I agree. It's a book our community has talked about before too in our writings. Well, I hate to stymie a great conversation, but we are out of time and need to wrap. But I wanted to give Mr. Norberg, our guest and our author, the last word, an opportunity to leave us with some summary thoughts if you'd like, and also to give us a sense of what you're working on now or where folks can find you if they want to learn more about your work.
Well, thank you. This was a great conversation, and this is exactly what the proof of the book, in a way, the thesis. This is how you learn. This is how you constantly come away from something a little bit smarter than you were before, because you look through the eyes of others, and then you can build something on top of that. And I really do appreciate that. Well, what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to look at this in other ways. There will probably be another book at some stage. But right now I'm doing a video series on innovation, looking at all those great things that we cherish and love, from the personal computer to the umbrella, to look at where they came from and how they were surprisingly often the result of open processes of collaborative and often competitive relationships with others. It's not. It never came from a committee or a plan or anything like that. So that's new and improved, a video series that I'm producing right now.
Where's that available if we wanted to see that?
That should be available on most streaming services, but specifically you can go to Free to Choose Network, the production company that produces these, Free to Choose Network.
Okay, great.
Great, thanks for that, and thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, the book is Open, the Story of Human Progress. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we suggest you pick up a copy, check it out, and leave your comments. We'd love to hear what you think of the book. And folks, let's do it again sometime.
Yes, thank you, Johan. It was wonderful. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.